They called her Wrench Girl, laughing as she wiped grease from her face under the blistering sun. "That rotor needs a real mechanic," one sneered. Lyra Kane didn't look up until the ground shook with the Black Hawk's crippled landing. In seconds, she was under the blades, hands moving faster than their insults. Then it happened. A waterproof envelope slipped from her pocket. Major Grant Mercer caught it, his eyes locking on the words classified, eyes only. She wasn't just fixing a rotor, she was hiding orders that could change everything. "This is Veteran Biker. Comment 1 if you're new. 2 if you've been with us. 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end." Heat lifts off the tarmac in wavering sheets that make the far fence look like it's breathing. The sun chews at paint, at patience, at anything soft enough to bruise, and the only shade is the blade shadows circling on the concrete like a slow black halo. Beneath it, Lyra Kane works without ceremony. Gloves tugged tight, sleeves rolled once. Not to look tough, but because fabric catching on safety wire wastes seconds. She smells of solvent and dust, and the faint copper tinge of old hydraulic fluid that never fully leaves a flight line. A rag is tucked into her waistband. The rag is not white anymore. Nothing stays white here. They watch her, some because she's good, most because watching is easier than sweating through someone else's problem. A couple because mockery is a sport that costs nothing up front. The nearest joker has sunburn peeling at the edges of his cheeks and a smile that lives 2 inches wider when others nod along. "Careful with that, Wrench Girl," he calls, like the phrase is clever the 50th time. "You snap a safety clip and we'll be picking teeth out of the tail boom." The laughter is quick and small, a flock of birds startled into the same direction. Lyra doesn't look up. The Black Hawk's main rotor head is splayed open like a stern patient on an operating table, pitch change links. Exposed, dampers streaked with dirt, a smear at the base of a lead lag damper that shouldn't be there. She plants a knee on the skid, leans in, listens, not metaphorically. She listens the way old mechanics do, for the difference between a normal tick and the click that says metal is fretting where it shouldn't. Wind rushes along the fuselage and ripples the grease-stained paper taped under her elbow. Talk, values, thread directions, the kind of banal gospel that keeps families from dressing in black. "Want me to get a real tech?" someone else asks. "Or maybe a mirror so you can fix your eyeliner." The second laugh is bigger. It fills the space where instruction ought to be. A crew chief across the pad glances over, thinks better of stepping in, and returns to his own headache. Supervisors have learned that stepping between a roaring engine and a joke is riskier than it sounds. Lyra threads a safety wire with a deft twist, crimps it, checks the tag direction, checks again. The helicopter had limped home with a vibration that climbed with each knot of airspeed. The pilot swore the stick hummed in his palm like a tuning fork. Could be a damper, could be a blade cuff hair out of tolerance, could be a misbehaving elastomeric bearing pretending to be fine until it isn't. She runs 2 fingers under a fitting and pulls back wet. She rubs forefinger against thumb, not fuel, not oil. The skin memory says mil PRF 500606. She follows the gleam to a hairline fissure in a line that should have retired 1,000 hours ago and did not. "Tell me you're not just poking at it for the photo," the sunburned one says. His name patch is scuffed into something unreadable. Maybe he likes it that way. Anonymity makes bravado cheaper. Rotor heads aren't Instagram. "Leave her," a quiet voice offers from the periphery. It doesn't carry. Quiet rarely does. She tags the line, calls for a replacement with a clipped request over the headset slung around her neck, and while she waits, she checks the track and balance records stapled to the work pack. Last flight, slight lead on Blade 2, slight lag on 4, within the band, but trending. The sheet is a history of tiny disagreements between lift and gravity. She reads it like an ultrasound, a heart map of a machine that does not understand mercy. Major Grant Mercer watches from 30 yards off, where the line of shade from a corrugated roof draws a thin mercy across the concrete. Uniform immaculate, cap-shadowing eyes that have stared at dashboards and dossiers long enough to tell when a person is bluffing. He didn't come to study a mechanic. He came because the pilot who limped this aircraft home is in the medical tent with a tremor that hasn't fully left his right hand, and because this bird needs to be ready before dusk sets the hills on fire. He came because commanders who don't look get surprised. He stays because the woman under the Black Hawk behaves as if time were a vein she can tie off with the right tool. She doesn't fumble. She doesn't posture. She doesn't ask for help she doesn't need. When the replacement hydraulic line arrives, plastic cap still bright on both ends, she peels the seals with her teeth, spits them into her palm, pockets the waste, and breaks the connection with a smooth turn that should be taught to anyone who thinks finesse and force are opposites. The old flare nut frees with a reluctant sigh. She inspects the seat, wipes grit, threads new line, and mind counters the torque as the wrench arcs, not the number printed on the page, but the torque that exists in the world when fittings have history and threads remember their first crush. "Hey, princess," the sunburned voice returns. "You want me to get a stool? Looks heavy." He gets a look from a buddy that says not today, and laughs anyway because this is the role he plays. Lyra's jaw tightens once, not from the words. Words are rain. What bothers her is the one bolt that refused to seat exactly flush on the first try. She recenters the washer, breathes, and it yields the way stubborn things do when patience is applied like pressure. The rotor head is a spider's cathedral. 4 blades reach for sky. The hub gathers secrets. Beneath, transmission housing hums residual heat. The air trembles with a faint, nearly music, the way a shell sings after surf drags past. A group on break forms a half ring at the boundary where curiosity and responsibility meet. Far enough to claim distance, close enough to catch a stumble. A couple of them record on their phones under the pretext of documenting maintenance, though what they're really after is a sliver of spectacle to send back home. Mercer notes how the woman's eyes move, not with the jitter of guessing, with the economy of someone who already ran the checklist in her head at dawn before the rest of the camp was fully awake. He catalogues other small betrayals, the way she keeps her body outside the plane of rotation without ever having to think about it, the way she parks her tools in the same pattern, each time so muscle memory can find the 12mm without her eyes, the way her shoulders settle when the pitch links align and a tiny misalignment resolves to 0. Skill is easy to mistake for luck if you arrive after the work. A Black Hawk, even asleep, speaks. It speaks in the tick of contracting metal, in the sigh of hot air escaping places it gathered, in the occasional pop as sun-cooked paint reconsiders its life choices. Lyra speaks back, not in words but with a ritual of touch. She taps a cuff, half hums a bar of nothing. She counts, silently, lips still, as she secures safety wire tails and tucks them flat so nothing sharp waits for flesh. She has scars on the backs of her hands from less careful days. She carries them like old receipts, A dust devil stumbles across the far end of the apron and collapses around a stack of pallets, sending a stinging haze that makes the whole scene look like a mirage. A medevac spins up 2 pads away. That long ascending whine, knife on glass, is so common here it becomes part of the weather. Someone curses when a socket rolls into a crack you don't put your fingers into if you like keeping fingernails. Still tightening? The joke returns, thinner now, because even hecklers feel the drag of a job moving toward completion. We've got birds that actually fly if you need practice. This time, she lifts her head. Not far, just enough that her eyes meet the group. There is no heat in her stare. There is instead a weariness that suggests she has heard this song performed by better singers and lived through it unscarred. The stare flicks past them to the horizon where the ridgeline cuts the sky into 2 truths. Up there, heat knots into storms. Down here, heat unravels the best intentions. Then she goes back to the task. The stare did what it needed to, by one uninterrupted breath. Mercer shifts. The line of his mouth says he's measuring more than maintenance. He steps closer, slow. He leaves his shadow just outside her workspace, because people who intrude where machines can bite are a special brand of problem. Status, he says. He doesn't raise his voice. It finds her anyway. Replacing damaged hydraulic line, Lyra answers without looking. Her voice has gravel from long mornings, inspecting dampers after. She passes him the spent line without flourish. The fracture is ugly and clean, a hairline that grew teeth. He turns it in his hand in the way of a man who likes to see a thing from all sides. How long? She checks the panel clock without seeming to, soon as I bleed the air and confirm pressure holds. A beat, if nobody bumps what I just tightened. That earns the smallest of smiles from him, reflexive, then gone. A headset crackles, a crewman asking if the bird will make the next sortie block. She doesn't answer with hope. She answers with math. If they can live with a low-speed Tan-B today, she says into the mic, I can restore airworthiness and bring it up within tolerance by last light. She cuts the line before anyone can try to negotiate physics. The crowd thins, the way crowds do when the possibility of work migrates their direction. The sunburned one lingers as if to reclaim the ground he's lost. He taps the tail of a safety wire with a fingernail, like he's tempted to flip it up just to watch it spring. Lyra angles her body so he'd have to reach across her wrist to touch anything and goes still. Predators hate stillness. There's nothing to push against. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, a hammering sound rolls over the compound. It isn't thunder. In this place, thunder doesn't sound like that. Heads turn the way flocks do, a collective angle of jaw toward the hills. The sound fades. A hum returns. The moment passes without passing. Bleeding the line is messy and exacting. Open, pump, close, check, repeat. She does it like a ritual, wiping fittings before they can drip onto places where fluid attracts dust, and dust becomes a paste no one wants to find at the wrong time. Pressure climbs on the gauge, settles shy of where it must be, then after 2 more cycles cooperates. She logs the numbers without writing them yet, storing them in that short term. Pocket humans have used since before ink to hold what can't be dropped. When she finally scribbles, the handwriting is ugly and efficient, the kind that will still be legible after a week in a binder that's seen rain. Mercer watches the way she signs her name, fast, not careless, and files that away under tells. He has a list whether he admits it or not. He has lists for everything, things that belong, things that don't, things that pretend. The name on her chest matches the line in his briefing book. But names are the cheapest things out here. A shadow falls, cloud or wing, it doesn't matter. For a breath, the temperature drops enough to imagine relief. The airfield exhales as one organism. A joke starts and dies. Someone coughs a cough that should see a medic and won't. A radio sputters a call sign that means nothing to anyone not meant to hear it. In that stutter of almost quiet, Mercer hears something else, the small click of respect shifting course. Not universal, not loud, but a few of the watchers have moved from smirk to something more cautious. They don't clap. This isn't a movie. They simply stop daring the machine to bite her. Lyra finishes the bleed, taps the gauge and nods once to herself. She checks the dampers with a hand under the rubber bellows, feeling for warmth that came from friction rather than sun. She marks a cuff with a circle and an arrow, her symbol for revisit. When she steps back at last, it's not with a flourish. It's the step of someone who knows the next person who touches this bird might be a 19-year-old who believes he's immortal. She tidies the tools in a motion that looks like habit because it is. Order is a kind of armor, and she wears it without telling anyone. "Ready for ground run," she says. It isn't a boast. It's a sentence with a job at the end. Mercer nods to the crew chief, who's been waiting like a diver at the edge of a board, ready to move when someone says it's safe. The pilot who brought the helicopter in is still in the tent. Another steps up, helmet under elbow. Expression set to neutral because you don't transmit doubt to a machine that gets jealous. Lyra steps to the side, but not away. She stays close enough that if something chatters when the engine spools, she can hear it over the din. The start sequence begins, a staged symphony the entire base knows by heart. Batteries bring systems awake. The caution panel does its Christmas tree impression. Then one by one the lies drop off until only the honest warnings remain. The auxiliary power unit coughs alive. The main engine whines, turbine blades catch fire and spin the kind of invisible circle humans learned to trust 1 century ago and never stopped gambling on. The rotor creeps, then crawls, then gathers speed until the blades are not 4 but 1, a glass disc slicing light, into a halo that wanders over Lyra's face and makes her look for a second like she's standing underwater. She leans in. The voiceover you would never hear on site plays in the head anyway. There it is, that tiny tremor at 60%. Now gone. There's a shimmy you could chase for hours and fix in 8 minutes if you knew where the ghost lives. She doesn't smile. Smile is for after. Her eyes unfocus the way they do when hearing matters more than seeing. She holds a hand out, palm feeling the edge of air that comes off the disc, reading turbulence like Braille. Then she nods twice, a private signal to the part of herself that keeps score. Mercer doesn't applaud. He files the steadiness. He files the way the mockers have drifted, as if distance from their earlier selves makes the burn less bright. He files the way the woman never once looked over for a word, any word, from a man in a better pressed uniform. He steps in then, bridging the space between oversight and acknowledgement without making either a ceremony. "Good work," he says. It lands without splashing. She glances at him, an appraisal, the fast tug of an anchor line to test its hold. "It'll fly," she says. She doesn't add if they don't do anything foolish. He can hear it anyway. The pilot signals. The bird lifts a breath off its skids and sets back down. A hop that says more about confidence than any speech. The crew chief snaps 2 thumbs without looking anyone in the eye because eye contact turns this into theater, and no one here trusts theater. The engine winds down, the disc becomes blades again. The blades become pieces of composite you can touch and defy. Heat swallows the pad. People start to move to the next thing. In places like this, the next thing is always already occurring. The sunburned joker lingers long enough to form the first syllable of something that might be apology if it grew legs. It doesn't. He wanders off, all edges. Lyra wipes a smear from the root of blade 3 and leaves the faintest clean streak, a bright slash against dull paint that could be mistaken for pride if you were sentimental. It is not pride, it is simply the work. Mercer's radio chirps his name, a clipped summons calling him toward paperwork that pretends to be decisions. He acknowledges, doesn't move. He is not done watching. Something about the quiet economy of this woman has scratched at a part of his mind that does not like to be ignored. He tries on a few possibilities for size. Prior experience beyond her pay grade, a mentor. With high standards, a life spent around machines that don't forgive faint hearts. None fits. He files that too. A breeze glides across the field and lifts the corner of a patched pocket on Lyra's chest. For an instant the fabric tense, then falls. A nothing moment, the kind of moment everyone else misses, the kind of moment a patient observer hoards without knowing why. "Get some water," Mercer says at last, not as an order so much as a human suggestion. "Then get me a ground run report. I want it signed by you, not maintenance." "Yes, sir." The words are crisp without being brittle. She doesn't salute. This is a pad, not a parade. She does something rarer, meets his gaze unafraid, as if two people in a hostile climate have recognized in each other the same addiction to competence. He starts toward the shade, and the next demand, she packs tools into the roll, cinches the strap, hefts the weight as if it were a memory. You choose to carry because it keeps your hands from forgetting why they exist. Somewhere beyond the berm, a heat shimmer becomes a mirage of movement that is probably a goat and could be a man. A siren complains, then relents. The bass continues, stitched to its own rhythms by checklists and habit, and the duct tape of gallows humor. On the concrete where she knelt, there is a dark oval where sweat fell and evaporated into a ghost most of them won't remember. Somewhere a camera holds a slice of her work without context. Somewhere else, a report will be written in a room that knows air conditioning and labels. Both will miss the truth of this under a white sun, while boys played at scorn and a commander measured silences. A woman tuned a dangerous machine back toward life as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. The halo's shadow spins on, finds her again and moves past. A lull settles over the pad as crews drift back to their routines. The clatter of a toolbox closing echoes briefly, swallowed by the drone of generators. Lyra heads toward the supply shed with her tool rolls slung at her side, the weight pressing against her hip in a familiar rhythm. She's halfway to the doorway when the edge of fabric at her chest shifts again, this time with more than a hint of movement. Something slips free. It hits the concrete with a muted slap, corner bent from years of careful folding. A waterproof envelope, its seal intact, slides to rest in the shadow of a chock. Mercer's boots stop beside it. His gaze drops, then holds. The letters stenciled across the front are stark against the scuffed surface, classified, eyes only. A second line beneath, in block print, spells out Operation Silent Talon. Lyra turns, too late to hide the tightening in her shoulders. Mercer crouches, picks up the envelope, brushes a thumb across its face as though testing if the ink is fresh. His expression shifts almost imperceptibly, an inward narrowing, a man filing away questions faster than he can ask them. "This yours?" The words are flat, free of accusation, but edged with something that could become it. She steps forward, hand out. "It is." For a moment, neither moves. The air between them carries the tang of warm metal and faint aviation fuel. Then he passes it over. Her fingers close around the packet with care, as if its contents might bruise. She tucks it back into the pocket, fastening the flap with deliberate precision. Mercer studies her face. The way one studies a piece of terrain they've just learned hides something dangerous. "You carry that in an unsecured area? I carry what I'm told," she answers. The words are unhurried, like each one has been weighed before release. A voice calls Mercer's name from across the yard, sharp enough to cut through their exchange. He doesn't look away from her. "We'll talk later," he says, and leaves without waiting for agreement. Lyra watches him go, then slips into the dim of the shed. Inside, rows of spares line battered shelves, filters in sealed bags, hoses coiled like sleeping snakes, fittings that glint in narrow beams of light from the high vents. She places the tool roll on the bench, flips the buckles open, and begins sorting. Each piece finds its place, not out of compulsion, but because order is the only defense against chaos when the call comes in the middle of a job. Outside, a new sound cuts through the steady background hum, the rising pitch of sirens not meant for ceremony. A bass-wide alarm follows, its wail rolling over sheet metal and open ground. Lyra steps to the door. Across the flight line, ground crews scatter toward their stations. A voice over loudspeaker shouts about an inbound 60 with combat damage. The tail number is unfamiliar, but the urgency in the tone is not. She doesn't wait for instructions. Boots hit the pavement in long strides, the supply shed forgotten. As she approaches the pad, the familiar vibration of approaching rotors builds, distinct from the idling birds nearby. The sound grows ragged, slightly offbeat, like a runner favoring one leg. The helicopter appears over the perimeter, nose dipped, side gunners hunched low. Dust rises in advance of its landing, stinging eyes and coating tongues. It settles hard, the skids shuddering. Crewmen leap out, one supporting another whose flight suit is streaked dark at the thigh. A quick glance tells Lyra the damage isn't cosmetic. The main rotor turns sluggishly, the subtle wobble of a system under strain. No one else is moving toward it with tools in hand. Mercer is there now, scanning the scene. His eyes find her instantly. There's a beat where he could say no, could pull rank, could hand the problem to someone without an envelope in their pocket. Instead, he gestures her forward. She vaults onto the skid, sliding toward the mast, the smell of scorched composite thick in the air. Voices yell over each other, medical for the wounded crew, marshallers waving. Off-stray personnel, someone shouting about the next incoming flight. She shuts it all out. The defect speaks louder, a coupling flexing more than it should, heat radiating from a bearing that's working harder than designed. "Can you keep it airworthy?" Mercer's voice is at her shoulder, pitched to be heard but not spread. "If you give me space and parts," she replies, already reaching for the first wrench from the emergency kit tossed onto the pad. The unspoken agreement passes between them. Around them, the pad is a storm. Engines coughing to life, radios trading clipped reports, heat rippling off every surface. In its center, she works, the envelope still pressed flat against her chest. When the coupling breaks free under her hands, she feels Mercer watching, not just the repair, but the precision, the certainty. He says nothing. Neither does she. There will be time for questions, or there won't. For now, the only measure is whether the bird lifts again. The pad feels tighter now, as if every sound and shadow has drawn in toward the crippled helicopter. Heat shimmers twist the lines of distant buildings, and the air carries a restless pulse from engines idling on nearby stands. Lyra's hands move without pause, disconnecting the warped coupling, tracing the fluid path with the back of her fingers to find where resistance begins. A replacement arrives in the grip of a breathless runner from supply. It's still warm from sitting in its packaging on a sunlit shelf. She checks the threads with a quick glance, threads it in by hand until it seats, then applies the wrench in smooth arcs that make no wasted motion. The metal's faint creak under torque is exactly what she wants to hear. Compliance without surrender. Around her, the rest of the scene is a constant ripple of urgency. A medical team hurries the injured crewman toward the triage tent. A refuel truck brakes hard, tires squealing faintly on the hot surface. Someone shouts for clearance as another Black Hawk rolls forward from its stand. The smell is a mixture of jet exhaust, dust, and that acrid tang of overheated components. Mercer stays close, but not close enough to interfere. His stance is half guard, half observer, and his gaze moves between her work and the rest of the pad, like he's measuring which threat will arrive first, enemy or mechanical failure. Hydraulics should cycle clean now, Lyra says, leaning back to look up at the mast, but the dampers took a hit. This won't be a smooth ride. How rough? He asks. Enough to make the pilot swear, not enough to tear it apart before you get where you're going. That answer hangs in the heat for a second. She can see him weighing it, then nodding once. A crew chief jogs up, visor pushed high, sweat streaking through the dust on his face. Birds needed for an extraction run. Hostiles closing. We have 10 minutes, tops. The information lands heavy, but Lyra doesn't change pace. She connects the final hydraulic line, bleeds air with practiced efficiency, and signals for the crew to bring power online. The turbine spools with a rising whine, rotor beginning its slow, hypnotic spin. She keeps her eyes on the gauges, one hand resting on the frame for balance. The first pressure reading climbs steadily. She leans in, listening for the faint hiss that betrays a hidden leak. Nothing but the steady churn of fluid through lines. She taps the glass of the second gauge, numbers holding where they should. From the corner of her vision, she catches movement. The sunburned mechanic from earlier is hovering just outside the safety line, arms folded, expression unreadable. His usual smirk is gone, replaced by something closer to curiosity, or maybe reluctance to admit curiosity. When her gaze flicks to him, he looks away, muttering something to the man beside him. A faint tremor runs through the deck plates as the rotor gains speed. Lyra signals to shut down. She's ready, she says over her shoulder. Mercer steps in as the blades slow. You're coming with it, he states, not asks. Lyra studies him for half a beat. Why? Because if anything goes wrong out there, you're the one who can keep it in the air. And his eyes drop briefly to her pocket, where the envelope lies hidden again. I think your orders might involve more than just turning wrenches. She doesn't confirm or deny. Instead, she gives a small nod. Then let's go. The crew chief calls for boarding. Lyra climbs in behind the pilot's seat, headset already in place. Mercer takes the seat across from her, strapping in with the easy familiarity of someone who's done this too many times to count. The cabin smells of dust, sweat, and the faint sweetness of spilled hydraulic fluid. The gunner checks his weapon, brass rattling in the belt. The pilot glances back, gets a thumbs up from Lyra, and turns forward again. The lift is abrupt, a punch of gravity that presses them into their seats as the Black Hawk rises above the pad. The base shrinks beneath them, rectangles of tents, neat lines of parked aircraft, the shimmer of heat still distorting the horizon. Wind shoves through the open side doors, snapping at straps and loose ends. Lyra leans slightly to peer at the gauges mounted by the crew chief. Station, her eyes scanning for any sign of the fault returning. So far, the readings are steady. Mercer watches her more than the landscape. That operation name, Silent Talon, he says into the intercom. Never heard it before today. Then you're not supposed to, she replies evenly. Her eyes stay on the instruments. The pilot's voice cuts in, sharp with focus. 2 minutes to LZ. We've got company. Fast movers, low altitude, closing from the east. The gunner braces, scanning the sky. Mercer shifts in his harness, one hand on the frame above him. Lyra's hand tightens around the support beside her seat. Not from fear, but to keep her balance steady enough to read the gauges without distraction. Through the open door, sunlight flares on something metallic in the distance. The shimmer grows, resolves into the shape of another helicopter, its nose painted in the muted tones of an enemy unit. The radio hisses with a burst of static and clipped commands. Looks like your smooth ride just got interesting, Mercer says, and for the first time there's a ghost of a grin on his face. Lyra adjusts her headset, her tone calm against the thrum of the rotors. Then we'd better make sure this one stays airborne. The first glimpse of the landing zone comes through a haze of churned dust and drifting smoke. The pilot keeps the nose low, skimming the ridgeline to stay masked from whatever might be tracking them. The vibration underfoot is different now, more urgent, more alive. As the Black Hawk pushes through turbulent air, Lyra braces in her seat, eyes locked on the hydraulic gauge mounted to the bulkhead. It's holding steady, but she doesn't trust a number alone. Her other hand rests lightly on the frame, reading the subtle changes in pitch through vibration, a mechanic's sixth sense telling her when the machine is unsettled. The gunner leans out the open door, scanning the tree line ahead. Movement. 3 o'clock, he calls into the intercom. Mercer leans toward the opening, just enough to catch a blur of figures moving between cover, too fast and too organized to be civilians. Pilot, alter approach, Mercer orders, voice steady. The helicopter banks hard, rotor tips cutting into the air with a sharper bite. Lyra feels the strain ripple through the frame, but notes with relief that the pressure lines remain solid. They come in from a different angle now, the landing zone revealing itself in fragments. A scorched clearing, 2 figures crouched low beside a makeshift barrier, muzzle flashes strobing in the sun. The crew chief gestures to the gunner, who opens up with a short, controlled burst. The sound rattles in the confined space, brass casings clinking against the deck before tumbling out into the slipstream. The pilot drops the Hawk toward the ground, skids touching down just long enough for the stranded team to sprint aboard. Lyra feels the shift in weight as the cabin takes on the extra load. Shouts mix with rotor wash, and then they're climbing again, nose pointed toward the thin safety of altitude. But the climb isn't clean. A new tremor runs through the deck, faint but wrong, like the first cough before an illness announces itself. Lyra's head snaps toward the gauge, seeing the needle quiver just outside its comfort zone. She keys the intercom. Mercer. Something's changing. I need to check the coupling. He unclips without hesitation, steadying himself against the lurch of the bird as it banks. Tell me what you need. Keep eyes on that gauge. If it dips more than 5 points, we'll need to bleed pressure before it spikes. The returning enemy fire begins to track them now. Sharp cracks against the airframe, the smell of scorched paint creeping into the cabin. The gunner fires back, swearing under his breath, and Mercer glances from the gauge to Lyra, then back. She pulls herself toward the maintenance hatch, the cramped space forcing her into a crouch. Each jolt from evasive maneuvers makes the work harder, her wrench slipping just enough to scrape knuckles raw. The coupling's surface is hotter than it should be, and she feels the faintest trace of fluid where there shouldn't be any. "We've got a slow leak," she calls out, raising her voice over the noise. "I can seal it for now, but it won't hold forever." Mercer's reply is crisp. "Do it. We just need forever to be 10 minutes." She works fast, wrapping the compromised joint with a temporary seal, cinching it until the heat bleeds into her gloves. The needle on the gauge steadies, not perfect, but enough to breathe without counting heartbeats. The pilot calls over the net, 2 minutes to the ridge. Once we're over, we're clear of their range. Lyra locks her tools back into place, sliding into her seat as the helicopter noses toward the safety of the high ground. Through the open door, the landscape spills out in layers. Dry riverbeds, jagged rock. The shimmer of heat that hides everything until you're nearly on top of it. Mercer meets her eyes across the cabin. There's no smile, no spoken thanks, just a small nod that carries more weight than either. She returns it, then turns back to watch the ridge rise ahead, hoping. The seal holds until the shadow of the base swallows them whole. The ridge looms closer, its jagged silhouette etched hard against the bleached sky. The pilot holds a low, aggressive line, rotor wash tearing at the scrub on the slopes. In the cabin, the rescued soldiers slump against the bulkhead, rifles still in their grip, eyes fixed on nothing. Lyra keeps one hand near the frame above her, not for balance but to feel the faint shiver in the Black Hawk's bones. The temporary seal is holding, barely. Every shift in pitch sends a warning up through her palm, the kind of subtle pulse that tells her the joint is fighting to stay together. Mercer, still strapped opposite her, keeps glancing at the gauge. He doesn't need to say it. They both know a single hard jolt could undo her work. The intercom crackles with the pilot's voice. Crossing the ridge, stand by. They crest the rise and drop into the valley beyond. For a moment, the air smooths, the turbulence falling away. Then a sharp metallic clang echoes through the cabin, something on the exterior giving under strain. Lyra's head snaps toward the sound. "Talk to me," Mercer says. "Seal's intact, but something else just shifted," she replies, already unbuckling. "Could be the damper we flagged earlier." The crew chief gives her a questioning look, but she's already moving toward the narrow space by the mast. The air here is hotter, tinged with the smell of metal rubbed too hard against itself. She grips the housing, feeling the rhythm of the rotor's load. One damper is running hotter than the others, the rubber gaiter trembling with each rotation. "It's degrading," she shouts over the roar. "If we keep high speed, it'll blow." Mercer relays to the cockpit. "Adjust speed, keep it steady, don't push her." The pilot answers with a clipped copy and eases back on the collective. The nose lifts slightly and the strain in the cabin shifts from a constant buzz to a deeper, slower thrum. It's not ideal for outrunning trouble, but it will keep the bird in one piece longer. Outside, the valley narrows. The walls on either side rise steep, throwing jagged shadows across the route. It's a natural choke point, perfect for an ambush. The gunner sweeps his sector, the belt of ammunition clinking softly as he adjusts position. Lyra edges back to her seat, never taking her eyes from the problem area. She knows exactly how much longer it will last, long enough if nothing else goes wrong, not nearly long enough if it does. The first shot comes from above, cracking against the armor plate behind the gunner. He swings the weapon toward the source, answering with a burst that echoes down the rock walls. More fire follows, pinging against the fuselage, some rounds biting deeper with a sound like tearing canvas. The pilot jinks left, then right, the Black Hawk swaying as rounds zip past. The damper shudders under the sudden forces, and Lyra can feel the change immediately. The vibration sharpens, climbing up through the airframe like a warning knell. "We can't keep dodging like this," she calls to Mercer. "Either we punch through or we're on the ground." His eyes are hard when he answers, "Then we punch." Mercer signals the pilot. The helicopter levels, trading evasive maneuvers for raw forward speed. The gunner pours fire into the rocky ledges as they race the length of the canyon. Incoming rounds snap past the open doors, a few close enough to feel the shockwave. Halfway through, a flash from the right ridge signals another threat. Lyra braces just as the impact slams the airframe, a jolt so hard it rattles teeth. She's moving before the noise fades, checking the coupling, astonished to find it still sealed. But the damper, the surface is scalding now, the tremor more pronounced. They clear the canyon mouth in a burst of sunlight, the open valley ahead like a promised reprieve. The firing fades behind them, replaced by the heavy, labored beat of the rotor. The pilot pushes for altitude, angling toward the distant smudge of the base. Lyra drops into her seat, sweat streaking dust across her face. Mercer meets her gaze, reading the truth there. They've bought themselves minutes, maybe less. "Can it make it?" he asks, low enough that only she hears. She considers the landscape rolling beneath them, the distance still to cover. If the ridge was the worst of it, yes. If not, she leaves the rest unsaid. The base is still too far to see, but both of them are already picturing it. The pad, the safety, the moment when they can finally shut the engines down and count the damage. Until then, the Black Hawk keeps flying on skill, stubbornness, and the fragile seal holding together under a sky that feels far too wide. The horizon wavers in the heat, the base still nothing more than a smear of pale geometry in the distance. The Black Hawk holds steady, blades beating a slow, heavy rhythm. Every turn of the rotor feels personal now, as if the machine is negotiating with itself to keep moving. Lyra's gaze never leaves the damper housing. She doesn't need to touch it anymore. She can feel through the floor panels how close it is to failing. Mercer watches her with the same measured intensity, one eye on the gauge, the other reading the lines in her face. Over the intercom, the pilot's voice comes tight. "We've got fast movers on scope. Unknown ID closing from the west. 4 minutes out." The crew chief mutters something under his breath. The gunner shifts his stance, feeding more belt into the weapon. Lyra doesn't move from her post, but her eyes narrow. "If they force us to maneuver, the damper's gone," she says flatly. Mercer keys the mic. "Tower, confirm approach corridor. We're bringing in a bird with critical damage. Need priority landing and cover." Static answers, then a garbled voice grants them clearance, promising air support en route. It's not soon enough. The shimmer of rotors appears low on the western horizon, growing fast. The trailing smoke behind one confirms what Lyra already knows. They're not friendly. 3 minutes, the pilot calls. Mercer shifts toward her. "If the part blows before we're down?" She meets his gaze. "We'll have one chance to put her on the ground without rolling her, and you won't like how it feels." The first incoming fire arcs long, missing but close enough to be felt. The pilot keeps straight and level, every instinct screaming to jink, but the restraint is deliberate. Lyra's hands tighten on the straps overhead. Every uncorrected gust feels like a dare to the damaged component. Then the second volley hits. One round slams into the armor plate behind Mercer, another tearing through the outer skin near the open door. The gunner answers with disciplined bursts, his tracers carving sharp lines in the sky. Lyra's eyes flick to the gauge. It dips, recovers, dips again. She swears under her breath, unclipping her harness, "I'm going to reinforce it." Mercer doesn't argue. He braces himself against the bulkhead as she moves to the cramped mast access again, tools already in her grip. The heat radiating from the damper is worse now, enough to sting through gloves. She works fast, wrapping a secondary strap over her earlier seal, cinching it until the vibration smooths slightly. 30 seconds, the pilot warns. The base perimeter is finally visible ahead, a blur of fencing, hangars, and the flat expanse of landing pads. Lyra drops back into her seat, meeting Mercer's eyes in a quick nod. It's as much confirmation as she can give. They hit the perimeter low, skimming the fence line. Friendly gunners on the ground open up, their tracers slicing past the Hawk toward the enemy behind. The pursuing helicopters break formation under the pressure, peeling off before they cross into the defended zone. The base is up close now, pad crews already in motion. The pilot brings the Hawk in with deliberate gentleness, every input slow to keep the stress off the mast. The skids kiss the pad once, bounce a fraction, then settle. Engines spool down, the rotors bleeding off speed. Only then does Lyra allow herself to unclench her jaw. She unstraps, stepping onto the pad as the last blade passes overhead with a low, tired sigh. Mercer is right behind her. "Get that looked at," he says to the crew chief, jerking a thumb toward the mast. The man nods, already moving in with his team. They start toward the hangar, but Mercer slows his pace, drawing her a step aside. "You didn't just keep a helicopter flying out there, you kept people breathing. That's not in any maintenance manual." Lyra glances toward the Black Hawk, still shuddering faintly as the turbines wind down. Machines are predictable if you listen to them. People, less so. His eyes narrow slightly, the weight of the earlier discovery hanging between them. "That envelope. I want to know what it is, and why you're carrying it on my flight line." For a moment she says nothing. The noise of the pad fills the space, tool carts rattling, ground crew shouting, another bird lifting off. Then she answers, low enough that only he hears. "Orders, not from here, and not for anyone else's eyes. That operation name, Silent Talon." She doesn't confirm, but the flicker in her expression is enough. Before he can press, a shadow falls across them. A man in plain fatigues, no unit patch, stands just inside earshot. His stance is too still for a random passerby. When Mercer turns toward him, the man is already walking away, a faint click in his radio as he disappears between hangars. Lyra's eyes follow him. "One of yours?" Mercer shakes his head. "Not mine." The moment stretches, unspoken tension settling over both. Somewhere beyond the pad, the alarms have stopped, but neither of them feels the quiet as safety. Finally, Mercer says, "We're going to have that talk. Soon." Lyra adjusts the strap of her tool roll on her shoulder. "Then you'd better decide whose side you're on before we do." She turns toward the hangar, leaving him with the weight of the choice, the damaged helicopter cooling behind them, and the image of a sealed envelope that now feels like the most dangerous thing on the base. Mercer doesn't follow her immediately. He stands there on the pad, the sun burning the sweat into his collar, watching Lyra disappear into the hangar's shadow. The noise of the base is coming back to full volume now, tool carts clanging, turbine, whines starting up again, shouted orders bouncing off corrugated walls. But his focus is fixed on that single pocket where the envelope had been, the one that carried a name he'd never heard until today. He turns toward the operations building, taking a long route that keeps him out of the busiest lanes. Inside, the air is marginally cooler, the lighting dim enough to make the sudden absence of glare feel like stepping into water. A comms sergeant hands him a headset, murmuring about the debrief he's expected to attend. Mercer just nods, but his mind isn't on the meeting. From the second-floor window, he catches sight of her again. Lyra is standing near a stripped-down fuselage in the maintenance bay, sleeves rolled higher, hair pulled back tighter. She's surrounded by junior techs, all of them hanging on her quick instructions. There's no wasted motion, no hesitation, but there's also no warmth. She teaches like someone whose time is borrowed. The door behind him opens without a knock. It's Captain Rourke, intelligence liaison for the sector, with that perpetual half-smile that hides more than it reveals. "You looked like you'd seen a ghost out there," Rourke says, stepping inside and shutting the door. Mercer leans back against the desk. "You ever heard of something called Silent Talon?" Rourke's smile doesn't change, but his eyes do. A subtle tightening, like someone pulling a door shut in their head. "Where'd you hear that?" "Off a document I shouldn't have seen," Mercer replies, carried by a mechanic who doesn't act like a mechanic. Rourke doesn't answer directly. Instead, he picks up a folder from the desk, flips it open, and studies a sheet as if it were a grocery list. "If I were you, I'd stop looking at things that aren't your responsibility." Mercer straightens. "She just kept a crippled Black Hawk in the air through enemy fire. That's my responsibility." The captain sets the folder down and heads for the door. "Then do your job, Major, and let other people do theirs." When Mercer turns back to the window, Lyra is gone. She's in the back of the hangar, packing a narrow canvas satchel, tools, a small flashlight, 2 canteens, and the envelope, now tucked deep in a side pocket. The conversation with Mercer still rings in her ears. He's a soldier who notices details, and that makes him dangerous. But she also remembers how he'd kept his voice, even when the gauges dipped, how he'd taken her word without hesitation in the canyon. Footsteps crunch on the hangar's gravel strip. She doesn't turn until the voice comes, heading somewhere. It's the sunburned mechanic from earlier, minus the grin. His name patch reads Latham. "Not your concern," she says. "Fair enough." He nods toward the satchel. "But whatever's in there, the guy from Intel has been watching you since you landed. Might want to change your route." She studies his face for the first time. There's no humor there now, just a kind of wary respect. "Why tell me?" "Because I saw what you did out there, and because I've been on the wrong end of that kind of watch before." She slings the satchel over her shoulder. "Then you know I can't stop moving." She slips out a side door into the narrow service lane that runs behind the hangars. The air is thick with the smell of fuel and hot rubber. A forklift beeps lazily as it shifts a pallet of rotor blades. She keeps her pace steady, eyes scanning for the blind spots between cameras. Halfway down the lane, she spots Mercer leaning against a stack of crates. He's not in uniform jacket now, just fatigues and a plain t-shirt, which makes him look less like an officer and more like a man waiting for a decision. "You planning on disappearing?" he asks. "That was the idea," she replies. "You still haven't told me what's in that envelope." She studies him, weighing whether to speak. "If I tell you, you can't unknow it, and if you know, you'll have to choose a side." He steps closer, lowering his voice. "Maybe I already have." There's no time to argue. Down the lane, a pair of men in unmarked fatigues round the corner, scanning every shadow. Lyra glances at Mercer once, then tips her head toward the maintenance apron. "If you're coming, move now." They cut through the cluttered back end of the base, past stacks of dismantled rotor assemblies, rows of stripped avionics, the skeletal remains of an old airframe gutted for parts. The noise of the main pad fades behind them. Somewhere beyond the perimeter fence, a dog barks once and goes silent. When they reach the far gate, Mercer flashes his ID at the guard, who barely looks up from his clipboard. 100 yards beyond is the auxiliary landing strip, half forgotten, used mostly for storage. At its edge sits a single Black Hawk, nose pointed toward the open sky, rotors tied down but fueled. "You're not thinking," Mercer starts. "It's the fastest way out," Lyra cuts in, "and I'm the only one here who can fly her without a full crew." He stares at her for a long beat, then shakes his head with a humorless smile. "This is insane." "Insane would be staying," she says, moving to untie the rotor. "Coming?" Mercer glances back toward the main compound. Somewhere in there, the intel captain is probably already noticing they're gone. He steps up beside her and starts unhooking the tie-downs. The thrum of distant rotors carries on the wind, not from this bird, not yet, but from something moving in fast. Lyra looks up at him. "We've got maybe 5 minutes." He swings into the crew seat without further debate. "Then let's make them count." She climbs into the pilot's position, hands already moving over switches and controls. The Black Hawk stirs beneath them, power building, ready to trade the dust and heat for the uncertain air ahead. And somewhere deep in her satchel, the envelope waits, its waiter silent. Reminder that whatever comes next, turning back won't be an option. The auxiliary strip feels like a forgotten corner of the war. No guard towers here. Just sagging chain-link fence and weeds pushing through cracks in the concrete. The air is still, almost too still, as if the noise from the main base can't reach this far. Lyra's fingers move with mechanical precision over the Black Hawk startup sequence, flipping guarded switches. Checking the flow on the fuel gauge, watching the caution panel come to life in a ripple of amber light. Mercer is already on the intercom, his voice low and clipped. "Tower, this is Hawk 2-4, requesting immediate departure clearance from auxiliary pad, priority route south." His eyes cut toward Lyra between transmissions, silently asking if she's ready. She gives a curt nod. "We won't wait for approval." The turbines whine higher, rotors beginning their slow rotation. Dust eddies along the ground, spiraling outward. She glances over her shoulder. No sign of movement from the main compound yet, but the clock in her head is ticking fast. Then movement. 2 figures emerge from the gap between supply sheds, heads swiveling, radios pressed to their mouths. Not ground crew, not regular MPs. Their pace quickens when they spot the helicopter. "Straps on," Lyra orders, and Mercer yanks his harness tight. She increases throttle, the blades accelerating until they're slicing the air into a single shimmering disc. The 2 men break into a run, gesturing toward the Black Hawk. One of them reaches for the sidearm on his hip. Lyra lifts off before they're within 50 yards. The skids clear the ground with a hard upward jerk, wind from the rotors whipping the grass flat. A burst of dust blinds the 2 men as the Black Hawk banks sharply, angling south. The auxiliary strip drops away beneath them. For a moment, there's only open sky and the muted roar of the engines through their headsets. Then Mercer's voice cuts in. "We've got a tail, small, fast, low altitude. Could be a Kiowa." Lyra doesn't check the chase visually. She trusts the edge in his tone. "They'll try to force us back toward the base. We stay low. Use terrain." She drops their altitude until the shadow of the Hawk is skimming the dry riverbeds below. The earth rushes past in fractured glimpses, clusters of thorn scrub, the silver glint of rock, sudden washes of sand. Mercer swivels in his seat, eyes tracking the dot in the distance behind them, still there, closing slow. "They'll radio ahead," she says. "We need to be gone before they can vector anyone into our path." She pushes the speed higher, the nose dipping slightly. The vibration from the patch damper is back, not as bad as before, but enough to remind her they're flying on borrowed time. Every minute airborne is one more wager against the limits of her own handiwork. A narrow canyon appears ahead, its walls folding inward like a gate. Lyra angles toward it without hesitation. The wind in the canyon is rough, swirling unpredictably, but it will hide them from radar and visual tracking for a while. As they plunge between the walls, Mercer grips the frame overhead, bracing against the sudden buffet. The canyon floor whips by only a few dozen feet below the skids. "You've done this before." he says, more statement than question. Her eyes don't leave the line ahead. Once or twice, the comms crackle, a sharp-coded burst, not theirs. Lyra glances at Mercer. That's not base traffic. Intercept team, he guesses. They're tightening the net. A shadow flashes across the canyon mouth behind them. The pursuing helicopter, hugging the curve but struggling to match Lyra's speed through the twists. She uses the next bend to break line of sight, banking so hard the rotors bite the thin air with a violent shudder. For a stretch, there's no sign of the tail. But she knows better than to relax. These canyons run in loops and dead ends. One wrong turn and they could be boxed in. She pushes them through a narrowing gap where the wall's close enough to scrape paint if her line drifts a foot off. The headset pops again, this time with Mercer's voice pitched tight. Contact 2 o'clock high, fixed wing. Lyra tilts her head just enough to catch the glint of sunlight off a small attack aircraft banking toward them. The canyon has bought them cover from the chopper, but not from eyes in the sky. They'll call our position, Mercer says. They already have. Her hands are steady on the controls, but her mind is running through options. Speed is no advantage now. Agility and unpredictability are. She throws the Hawk into a descending turn, diving deeper into the canyon until the sky is a thin blue strip above. The sound of the fixed wing fades slightly, the canyon wall stealing its line of attack. Mercer checks the gauge, still holding, though the needle twitches on each hard maneuver. If that damper goes here, we're done. Then it doesn't go, she answers. There's no room for doubt. The canyon spills out suddenly into a wide basin, sun glaring off a shallow salt flat. Lyra keeps low, rotor wash kicking up pale dust that clings to the airframe. They're exposed here, but she's betting the glare and heat shimmer will throw off any pursuit just long enough to reach the far side. The horizon ahead begins to shimmer differently. Not heat this time, but motion. A line of scrub parts in the wind of another helicopter rising from the flat. This one is painted in the same muted scheme as their pursuers, nose already angling toward them. Mercer's jaw tightens. They're in front of us now. Lyra doesn't answer. Instead, she skims the Hawk to the left, aiming for a low ridge that breaks the flat like a scar. The pursuing craft adjusts to intercept, closing fast. At the last second, she pulls hard into a climbing bank, the black, Hawk's rotor tips skimming dangerously close to the ridge crest. They clear it by feet, dropping instantly into the shallow ravine on the other side. The sudden move leaves the intercept bird overshooting, its rotor wash churning the ridgetop as it scrambles to turn. Lyra uses the moment to dive the Hawk even lower, weaving between the ridge and scattered. Outcrops until the noise of the other helicopter fades behind the terrain. Mercer exhales, a short, sharp sound in the headset. You just bought us a minute. That's all we need, she says. Her eyes flick to the fuel gauge, then to the horizon where a faint green smear marks cultivated land, the first sign they're leaving the operational zone. They climb gradually now, just enough to clear the last set of hills. Below, the ground shifts from harsh rock to scattered fields, then to dirt tracks winding between low walls. The air feels different here, lighter, less brittle. Mercer leans back, but he doesn't relax. Where are we headed? A strip south of here, she says. Friendlies, no official ties. They'll get us clear. And the envelope? She keeps her eyes on the line ahead. It goes where it was meant to go. After that, maybe I disappear for good. The base and its problems are far behind now, but the weight in Mercer's chest hasn't lifted. He glances out at the horizon, knowing that whatever's in that envelope is pulling them towards something far bigger than either of them can see yet. And that, whether he admits it or not, he's already too deep in to walk away. Ahead, The faint outline of a makeshift airstrip comes into view, just a pale slash against the green. Lyra adjusts their course by a fraction, the rotors beating steady, the patched damper holding barely, long enough to promise they might actually make it. The airstrip is little more than a sun-bleached scar across a field, bordered by a few tin-roofed sheds and a line of trees that do little to hide it from the sky. No control tower, no fencing, just a dirt strip that's seen more crop dusters than military birds. Lyra angles the Black Hawk into a wide, slow arc, feeling every protest from the patch damper as she descends. Mercer scans the perimeter through the open door. No visible security. Either your friends are invisible or this place is wide open. They're not the type to wave flags, Lyra replies. Her hands stay light on the controls, coaxing the machine lower without stressing the mast. The rotors beat a steady, heavy rhythm, each rotation a reminder of how little margin they have left. They settle onto the strip in a rolling cloud of dust. The skids touch once, bounce, then bite into the earth with a muted thump. Lyra cuts power quickly, letting the blades wind down. The stillness that follows feels wrong after hours of vibration and engine roar. From one of the sheds, a man emerges in faded civilian clothes, moving with the quiet assurance of someone used to watching his surroundings. His hair is cropped short, his eyes hidden behind scratched aviator sunglasses. Two others appear behind him, carrying fuel cans and toolkits. Lyra climbs down first, slinging her satchel. The man in the sunglasses gives her a brief nod. "You're late. Had company," she answers. "And a helicopter that wanted to fall apart in midair." His gaze flicks to Mercer. "You bring a guest? He's the reason we made it," she says simply. Mercer steps forward, hand resting loosely on his belt. "Major Grant Mercer. I'd like to know what's in that envelope she's been risking her life to deliver." The man in sunglasses doesn't answer him. Instead, he turns to Lyra. "You sure about this?" Lyra hesitates for the first time all day. Then she reaches into her satchel, drawing out the waterproof envelope. Its edges are softened by years of careful handling, but the seal is intact. She holds it out, not to the man, but to Mercer. He takes it slowly, feeling the weight in his palm. The label is the same as before, classified, eyes only. The operation name is printed in the same bold type. He looks from the packet to Lyra. "If I open this, you'll be in it," she says. There's no stepping back. The man in sunglasses interjects, his voice low. "We don't have much time. The people chasing her will trace the flight path here eventually." Mercer studies Lyra's face. He's seen her under rotor wash, under fire, under the kind of pressure that crushes weaker people. And she hasn't flinched once. Now, in the quiet of this strip, he sees something different. Not fear, commitment. He breaks the seal. Inside is a thin sheaf of documents, each page stamped with the same classification. The text is sparse, heavy with code names and acronyms, but the meaning is clear enough. Silent Talon isn't just a mission, it's a contingency plan. One that names individuals in command positions, outlines covert asset movements, and authorizes actions well outside the boundaries of their own chain of command. Mercer exhales, the reality settling on him like weight. If this is real, it's real, Lyra says, and if it stays buried, a lot more people will die without anyone knowing why. The man in sunglasses gestures toward the sheds. "We can transmit it from here, but once we do, there's no hiding. Not for you, not for him." Lyra meets Mercer's eyes. "Your call. You're in now." He looks down at the pages one last time, then hands them back. "Do it! Inside the shed, the air smells of oil and dust. A battered transmitter sits on a desk, its cables snaking across the floor to a jury-rigged antenna outside. Lyra lays the documents flat, and the man in sunglasses begins scanning them. The soft whir of the machine loud in the stillness. Outside, one of the other men refuels the Black Hawk. Mercer stands by the door, scanning the tree line, every sense tuned for the sound of approaching rotors. He doesn't have to wait long. A faint chop carries on the wind. He steps back inside. "They're coming." "Halfway through," the man says without looking up from the scanner. Lyra moves to Mercer's side, her expression unreadable. "We can't fight them here. Too exposed." Mercer nods toward the Black Hawk. "Then we take the files and go. Finish the transmission somewhere they can't follow." The man in sunglasses pulls the half-scanned stack from the tray, slides them back into the envelope, and shoves it into Lyra's hands. "Head north. There's a safe strip, 20 clicks. You'll have cover there." They're already moving before the last word leaves his mouth. Mercer takes the crew chief's seat, weapon in hand. Lyra powers up the Hawk again, the turbine screaming into life. The dust plume rises, swallowing the shed and the men behind them. As they lift, the sound of the approaching helicopters grows, loud enough now to feel in their bones. Mercer looks out the side door, spotting two dark shapes breaking over the tree line. "They've got range on us," he warns. Lyra banks hard, pulling every ounce of speed from the damaged rotor system without tipping it into failure. The valley ahead offers a dozen routes. She picks the one with the most bends, each turn stealing a little more of their pursuer's line of sight. The envelope rests in the map pocket by her knee, its weight a constant reminder. Mercer keeps his eyes on the sky behind them, counting the seconds until the sound of the chase fades or sharpens into gunfire. For now, it fades. They fly low, skimming the hills, the sun sliding west behind them. The safe strip is still miles away, but with each beat of the rotor, the distance closes. Mercer doesn't ask what happens when they get there. He already knows the answer. Whatever's in those pages, they'll have to see it through. And for the first time, the choice doesn't feel like hers alone. It's theirs. Together. The sun was already dipping low, burning the edges of the hills in molten orange when the safe strip finally came into view. A thin line of dust in a valley no map officially recognized. Lyra set the Black Hawk down with the same steady hands that had kept it alive. Through enemy fire, rotor strain, and a chase they both knew wasn't over. The engine's whine faded into a low hum, then silence. Mercer climbed out first, scanning the horizon, but for the first time since they'd left the base, there was no shadow on their tail. The air felt different here, lighter, but edged with the knowledge that peace never lasted long in their line of work. Lyra stayed in the cockpit a moment longer, her gaze resting on the envelope in the map pocket. The corners were creased now, the seal broken, the contents heavy with the kind of truth that could change everything or burn everyone who touched it. When she finally stepped down onto the dirt, Mercer was waiting. He didn't ask if she was ready. He didn't need to. The choice had already been made in the canyons, over the ridge, in every silent look, exchanged between them under the thump of rotors and the hiss of incoming fire. Somewhere behind them, men in unmarked fatigues would be finding an empty airstrip and asking the wrong questions. Somewhere ahead, the transmission of those documents would draw attention from people who preferred to work in the dark. But here, for just this breath of time, the machine was still, the air was clear. And they both knew exactly why they'd risked everything to get this far. Because in the end, it wasn't about orders or even survival. It was about doing the one thing no one expected them to do, refuse to look away. This is Veteran Biker. And stories like this aren't told because they're easy. They're told because they matter. Because someone, somewhere, is going to hear it and remember that the smallest decision, a nod to trust, a refusal to stand down, can change the course of a fight. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments below. If you've stood your ground when it mattered, if you've chosen to push through instead of turn back, share it. And if you want more stories of grit, loyalty, and the kind of courage that doesn't make headlines, but shapes the world in silence, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and stay with us. The next mission is already in motion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. On the screen now you'll find more from Veteran Biker. Click and keep riding with us.